Black CEO, mocked by white billionaire. Family minutes later, she pulls the $950M plug. Hello, everyone! Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Hey, Blackie, go serve. The words were loud, careless, sharp enough to slice straight through the crystal hum of the ballroom. They came from a woman in a midnight blue gown, diamonds flashing at her wrist as she laughed, finger extended like a verdict. Her voice carried easily over the orchestra, over the soft clink of champagne glasses, over the low murmur of inherited confidence. Around her, men in tailored tuxedos and women draped in silk erupted into amusement, as if cruelty were just another form of entertainment. At the center of it all stood a black woman in a pale rose dress, simple, impeccably tailored, no logo screaming wealth. No entourage orbiting her, just her posture straight, unbothered, and a phone pressed calmly to her ear. She didn't flinch. Behind her, the ballroom glowed like a cathedral to excess. Chandeliers spilled warm light across marble floors. Old money laughed too loudly. New money watched closely, phones already lifting, hungry for a moment worth recording. This wasn't just a party. It was a stage, and the room had decided who was meant to perform and who was meant to serve. The woman in blue laughed again, louder this time, feeding off the attention. Seriously, she added, waving her hand dismissively. Staff entrance is that way? A ripple of laughter followed. Not everyone laughed, but no one stopped it. The black woman on the phone turned slightly, her gaze drifting across the room, faces full of assumptions. Smiles sharpened by entitlement. People who believed that space itself conferred authority. Hold, she said quietly into the phone. Just one word. Her voice was calm, level. The kind of calm that didn't ask permission. The laughter began to thin, not because anyone felt guilty, but because something about her stillness felt wrong, as if the room had misread the script. The woman in blue noticed the shift and scoffed. Don't just stand there, she said. You people always freeze when you're caught somewhere you don't belong. That did it. Phones rose higher. A few guests leaned in, eager. This was the moment, the humiliation everyone would replay tomorrow. But the woman in rose didn't react the way they expected. She lowered her phone, slowly, deliberately. And for the first time, she looked directly at the woman pointing at her. Not with anger, not with embarrassment, with clarity. The air changed. Not dramatically, subtly, like the temperature dropping a single degree. Enough to be felt, not enough to be explained. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Alana Brooks. Alana adjusted her grip on the phone, eyes never leaving the woman who had just reduced her to a stereotype in front of 100 witnesses. Somewhere behind the laughter, a few people had gone quiet. A waiter paused mid-step. A man near the bar frowned, uneasy, as if sensing a storm without clouds. You should hurry, the woman in blue added, smiling thinly. Drinks don't pour themselves. Alana finally spoke. Interesting, she said, her tone soft but unmistakably firm. That's what you think this is. The woman blinked. Excuse me? Alana didn't answer. She turned away instead, lifting the phone back to her ear. Yes, she said into it. I'm here now. I've seen enough. A pause. Then, cancel it. The word landed quietly. No drama, no emphasis. But something about the way she said it made the space between conversations feel heavier. Alana ended the call, slipped the phone into her clutch, and stood perfectly still as the orchestra stumbled back into rhythm. Around her, laughter resumed, but weaker now. Forced, uncertain. No one in that room knew what had just been set in motion. They thought they'd witnessed a woman being put in her place. They had no idea they were standing inside the opening moments of their own collapse. The laughter didn't stop all at once. It thinned. like champagne bubbles rising slower, unsure whether to keep celebrating or settle into the glass. Alana Brooks stood exactly where she was, shoulders relaxed, hands steady at her sides. The pale rose fabric of her dress caught the chandelier light softly, nothing loud, nothing demanding attention. Yet somehow, the space around her began to feel heavier, as if the room itself were recalculating. The woman in the blue gown, Margaret Hale, noticed it too. Her smile faltered for half a second. Not long enough for anyone to call it doubt, just long enough to register irritation. "Well?" Margaret said, tilting her head. "Didn't you hear me?" Alana didn't respond. She wasn't ignoring Margaret. She was listening to something else entirely. To the quiet hum beneath the orchestra, to the subtle shift that happens when power realizes it may have misjudged its audience. A man near the back lowered his phone. Another guest cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable. Someone whispered, "Is she someone?" and was immediately shushed. Margaret laughed again, sharper this time. "Unbelievable," she said, turning slightly to her friends. "They really are trained to pretend they belong anywhere." That word trained landed wrong. Alana's eyes lifted, not to Margaret's face, but to her hand, the one still raised, finger half curled, as if pointing where a habit shed never needed to unlearn. Alana took one step forward, not toward Margaret, into the space between them. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't confrontational, but it was deliberate, and it erased the distance Margaret had assumed would protect her. "You know," Margaret said, lowering her voice as if offering advice, "if you're lost, I can have someone escort you out quietly. No need to embarrass yourself further." The irony hung there, pristine and cruel. Alana smiled, just barely. It wasn't warmth, it wasn't sarcasm, it was recognition. "Escort me?" Alana asked calmly. Margaret blinked. She hadn't expected a response, certainly not one that didn't tremble. "Yes," Margaret replied, recovering quickly. "This is a private event." Alana nodded once, as if considering the architecture of the room, the exits, the faces that had stopped pretending not to watch. "I see," she said. Behind them, the orchestra played on, but the music felt misplaced, now too cheerful for a room quietly holding its breath. Margaret leaned closer, lowering her voice further. "Let's not make this into something it doesn't have to be." That was when Alana turned fully toward her. For the first time, Margaret saw her eyes clearly. Not defiant, not offended, measured, the kind of gaze used in boardrooms when decisions were already made and objections were merely procedural. "You already did," Alana said softly. A few heads snapped up. Margaret laughed, but it came out wrong. "Oh, please," she said. "You think a little attitude changes where you stand?" Alana's smile faded. "No," she replied, "but it changes where you do." Margaret's expression hardened. "Excuse me?" Alana didn't answer. She reached into her clutch, slow enough for anyone watching to follow the motion. Not for a card, not for identification, just her phone. She unlocked it, glanced once at the screen, then looked back up. Across the room, a man in a charcoal tuxedo, someone important, judging by the way others deferred to him, froze mid-sip. His eyes widened, just slightly, as recognition flickered. Margaret missed it. "Security," she called out, not loudly but with confidence. The kind that assumes obedience. "We have a situation." The word echoed uncomfortably. Two guards shifted near the entrance. They hadn't moved yet. They were waiting for clarity. Alana didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply said, "Before you do that, you might want to check your phone." Margaret scoffed. "Mine?" "No," Alana said. "Theirs." The guards hesitated. One of them glanced down instinctively, thumb hovering over his screen as a notification lit up. His posture changed. Subtly. "Enough," Margaret noticed. "What is this?" she demanded. Alana slipped her phone back into her clutch. "This," she said evenly, "is the part where rooms like this get very quiet." And they did. Not because anyone understood yet, but because something irreversible had just begun. The room didn't explode into chaos. That would have been easier. Instead, it fractured quietly into glances, assumptions, and whispered conclusions that spread faster than truth ever could. "She must know someone," a woman near the bar murmured, eyes narrowed. Probably staff who overstayed, another replied, not bothering to lower his voice. A man in a gray tuxedo leaned toward his date. Maybe a sponsor's assistant. They always get ideas. Ideas. The word floated through the air like permission. Margaret Hale straightened, reassured by the murmurs backing her version of reality. This was familiar territory, rooms bending to her interpretation of events, people trusting her confidence more than their own doubts. She smiled again, practiced and indulgent. "See," she said lightly, gesturing around them. "Everyone's uncomfortable now. This is what happens when boundaries aren't respected." Alana Brooks said nothing. She stood still, hands loosely clasped, gaze drifting past Margaret as if the conversation were already beneath her. That, more than anything, irritated Margaret. Silence was only powerful when she used it. "You know," Margaret continued, lowering her voice but sharpening each word, "people like you mistake proximity for permission." A few heads nodded. The guards remained where they were, neither approaching nor retreating. That hesitation was new. It unsettled Margaret, but she refused to acknowledge it. Alana looked around the ballroom slowly, deliberately. She saw what they saw. A black woman without an entourage, without a visible name, without the performative markers of belonging this room required. They filled in the blanks themselves. To them, she was a mistake, a glitch in the social order. Someone who had slipped past velvet ropes meant to filter people like her out. Margaret took a step back, reclaiming distance. "Let's not drag this out," she said. "You don't want this to become memorable." Memorable. Alana almost smiled again, because to Margaret, memorable meant embarrassing. To Alana, it meant documented. Across the room, the man in the charcoal tuxedo checked his phone again. His jaw tightened. He didn't look at Alana this time, he looked at Margaret. And then, subtly, he shifted away from her. Another guest noticed. Then another. Small movements. Repositioning. People creating space without admitting why. Still, no one spoke up. That was the part Alana understood best. She had seen this room before, different city, different chandelier, same assumptions. She remembered the early days, when investors smiled politely and asked who she was really here with. When boardrooms mistook her calm for compliance. They always thought they knew the story before it finished telling itself. Margaret exhaled sharply. "Security," she said again, louder this time. "Please." The guards finally moved, but not forward. One of them adjusted his earpiece. The other glanced toward the side of the room, where a woman in a tailored black suit stood frozen, phone pressed to her palm, eyes locked on Alana with unmistakable recognition. Margaret followed his gaze. "What is going on?" she snapped. The guard hesitated. "Ma'am, we're just confirming something." "Confirming what?" Margaret demanded. Alana turned her head slightly. "Who I am," she said calmly. A ripple passed through the nearest guests, not laughter this time, but curiosity edged with discomfort. Margaret scoffed. "You think this is about names?" she said. "This is about place." Alana met her eyes. "No," she replied. "It's about ownership." The word hit differently. Not loud, not dramatic, just precise. Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but paused when the woman in the black suit finally stepped forward, her face pale, controlled. "Margaret," she said quietly, "we need to talk." Margaret turned, annoyed. "Not now." "Yes," the woman insisted. "Now." The orchestra faltered, notes dragging into silence. Conversations died mid-sentence. Phones lifted again, but this time with uncertainty, not delight. Margaret felt it then, the shift she could no longer deny. The room wasn't watching Alana anymore. It was watching her. And still, no one in that ballroom truly understood what they had misidentified. They thought Alana Brooks was someone who didn't belong. They were wrong. She was someone they had built everything around without ever realizing it, and the cost of that mistake was about to surface. Alana Brooks had learned long ago that power announced itself too loudly when it was insecure. Real power moved quietly. She stood in the center of the ballroom while the room tried to decide what she was worth, and for a fleeting moment her mind drifted not away from the present, but through it, backward, tracing the path that had led her here. She remembered conference rooms with polished tables and men who spoke past her, not to her. She remembered being praised for her insight and ignored when decisions were made. She remembered the way her proposals were questioned until someone else repeated them louder, whiter, and male. That was years ago, before the headlines, before the valuations, before the company became too large to dismiss and too profitable to overlook. Alana Brooks had not inherited a name people recognized. She had built one they depended on. She was 46 now, founder, majority shareholder, CEO of Meridian Axis Group, a private investment and infrastructure firm so discreet it barely existed in public conversation, yet so deeply embedded in global finance that entire markets moved when it adjusted its position. Ports, logistics, energy grids, municipal bonds, technology backbones no one noticed until they failed. Meridian Axis didn't chase attention, it acquired leverage, and Margaret Hale's family empire had been bleeding for years. The irony of it almost made Alana smile. Margaret's father, Robert Hale, had been negotiating for months. Quiet meetings, layers of attorneys, endless revisions. The deal was meant to save them. A $950 million capital infusion structured to look like partnership, but function like oxygen. The kind of deal desperate families prayed for. The kind that required one signature, Alana's. Robert Hale had never seen her face. He didn't need to. In his mind, Meridian Axis was an entity, not a person, a faceless gatekeeper of funds, an obstacle to manage, flatter, negotiate with. And now his daughter was pointing at that obstacle like it belonged to her. Back in the ballroom, Margaret folded her arms, unaware of how close she stood to the edge of something permanent. "You're enjoying this," she accused, mistaking Alana's composure for provocation. Alana looked at her, not unkindly, but with the patience reserved for someone who had never been forced to understand consequences. "No," Alana said. "I'm recognizing it." Margaret frowned. "Recognizing what?" "The pattern," Alana replied. Around them, the room continued its slow recalibration. People whispered names under their breath. Someone quietly searched on their phone. Someone else stopped recording altogether. The woman in the black suit, Meridian Axis legal director, stood a few feet away now, hands clasped tightly, waiting. She hadn't intervened yet. That was intentional. Timing mattered. Alana glanced at her once. That was all it took. Margaret noticed the exchange and felt a flash of irritation edged with something colder. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Do you know who my family is?" Alana nodded. Yes. The certainty in her voice unsettled Margaret more than anger would have. "My father is waiting for a deal to close," Alana finished calmly. "One he can't afford to lose." Silence snapped into place. Margaret stared at her. "What did you say?" Alana didn't repeat herself. She didn't need to. Across the ballroom, a man excused himself abruptly, already dialing. Another guest turned away from Margaret, eyes down. The guards near the entrance had stopped pretending not to watch. The orchestra remained silent. This was the moment before recognition when truth hovered just outside comprehension, too heavy to ignore, too inconvenient to accept. Margaret took a step back, suddenly unsure. "You're bluffing," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Alana's expression didn't change. "I don't bluff," she replied. "I decide." And for the first time that night, Margaret Hale felt something unfamiliar tighten in her chest. Not humiliation, not anger, fear. Because whatever story she had been telling herself about this woman, about who belonged and who didn't, it was unraveling. And the truth, when it arrived, would not be gentle. The phone vibrated once in Alana Brooks' clutch. Not urgently, not repeatedly. Just enough to confirm what she already knew. She didn't reach for it right away. That was deliberate. Power, she had learned, was often revealed not by speed but by restraint. Across from her, Margaret Hale was unraveling in small, imperceptible ways. Her shoulders were still squared, her chin still lifted, but the certainty had drained from her posture. She kept glancing around now, searching the faces that had once mirrored her confidence. They didn't anymore. Some had turned away. Others pretended to check messages that weren't there. A few watched Alana openly now, curiosity replacing mockery. Margaret cleared her throat. "This is getting absurd," she said. "If you're trying to intimidate me," Alana finally opened her clutch. The motion was slow, unremarkable. Yet the nearest guests leaned in without realizing it. Even the guards stilled. She looked down at the screen. One line of text, "Ready when you are." That was all. No emojis, no explanations, no deference. Alana typed 2 words. "Proceed," immediately. She locked the screen. Then she looked up. Margaret was watching her hands now. "Who are you texting?" she demanded. Alana met her gaze. "People who listen." Margaret laughed, but the sound cracked halfway through. "You think a phone call changes anything in this room?" "No," Alana said evenly. "I think it changes everything outside it." The words landed quietly, but they carried weight, the kind that didn't need volume. Behind Margaret, the woman in the black suit checked her phone. Her expression didn't shift, but her grip tightened. Somewhere near the bar, a man's phone chimed. Then another. A third. A low murmur rippled outward, not laughter this time, but confusion edged with unease. Margaret's smile vanished. "What did you do?" she asked. Alana didn't answer immediately. She took in the room, the chandeliers, the polished marble, the people who had been so comfortable moments ago, people who believed this space was permanent. "It's interesting," Alana said calmly, "how quickly rooms like this forget they're connected to the outside world." Margaret shook her head. "You're bluffing." Alana tilted her head slightly. "Still holding on to that?" Margaret's phone buzzed. Once. Her eyes flicked down instinctively. She tried to mask it, but she couldn't stop herself from checking. Her face changed. "Just a fraction." "Enough!" "What is this?" she muttered, scrolling. "This doesn't make sense." Alana watched her, silent. Margaret's fingers moved faster now. She refreshed the screen, swiped, her breath shortened. "No," she said, under her breath. No, this can't." She looked up sharply. "What did you cancel?" Alana answered at last. "Everything," she said. The word moved through the room like a pressure wave. A man near the stage whispered, "Is she serious?" Another guest stepped back, already dialing. Someone else excused themselves abruptly, heels clicking too fast against marble. Margaret stared at Alana, disbelief hardening into panic. "You don't have that authority," she snapped. "You can't just I can," Alana said quietly. "And I did." Margaret's phone vibrated again. And again. She didn't answer them this time. Around them, the orchestra remained frozen. The conductor's hands hovered uselessly in the air. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. The room had entered that rare, irreversible moment when denial collapses under confirmation. Alana adjusted her posture, smoothing the fabric of her dress as if preparing to leave. "This was never personal," she said, her voice steady. "You made it that way." Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. "You're destroying my family." Alana's gaze didn't soften. "No," she replied. "I'm responding to your choices." She turned slightly, already disengaging. And behind her, the consequences, silent, systemic, unstoppable, were beginning to surface. The deal was gone, and with it, the illusion that this room had ever belonged to Margaret Hale. The collapse didn't arrive with sirens or shouting. It arrived quietly, in conference rooms miles away, in inboxes that refreshed at the wrong moment, in accounts that froze without explanation. Inside the ballroom, Margaret Hale stood motionless, phone clenched in her hand as messages stacked faster than she could read them. "Urgent! Call me now! We have a problem." She tried to call her father, straight to voicemail. Across the room, Alana Brooks didn't watch the fallout. She didn't need to. She had already seen this part before many times, in many forms. This was what happened when systems corrected themselves. Meridian Axis moved like a machine once it was triggered. First came the withdrawal notices, precise, legally airtight, impossible to contest. The $950 million infusion evaporated from escrow before anyone at Hale Holdings could finish dialing their attorneys. Then came the secondary effects. Credit lines tightened. Ratings agencies flagged exposure. Partners who had been waiting to see suddenly decided they'd seen enough. All of it, executed calmly, professionally, without emotion. Exactly how Alana preferred it. The woman in the black suit stepped closer now, voice low and controlled. "It's done," she said. Full retraction. No ambiguity. Alana nodded once. Margaret overheard. "You can't do this," she said, her voice rising despite herself. Heads turned. "You're overreacting to a misunderstanding." Alana looked at her for the first time with something close to pity. "This isn't a reaction," she said. "It's a response." Margaret shook her head. "My father will fight this." "He can try," Alana replied. "He won't win." The certainty in her voice wasn't arrogance. It was math. Near the bar, the man in the charcoal tuxedo had finished his call. His face was pale now. He didn't look at Margaret, he looked at the exits, calculating distance. The orchestra never resumed. There was no need. The room had lost its appetite for performance. Margaret's phone buzzed again. This time, she answered. "Yes?" she snapped. Whatever she heard drained the color from her face. "No," she said. "That's not possible. We were promised." She stopped, listening. Her free hand tightened into a fist. Across the ballroom, someone whispered, "It's real." Another replied. They pulled out completely. Margaret lowered the phone slowly. "You planned this," she said, staring at Alana. Alana didn't deny it. "I prepared for it." There was a difference. Margaret took an unsteady step forward. "This was supposed to be our night." Alana inclined her head slightly. "It still is, but not in the way Margaret had imagined." The guards near the entrance shifted again, this time not out of uncertainty, but instinct. Power had realigned, and they felt it. So did the staff. So did the donors who had been so eager to laugh minutes earlier. One by one, people began to distance themselves from Margaret. Not dramatically, just enough to avoid proximity. Association had become a liability. The woman in the black suit spoke again, quiet but firm. "Transportation is waiting," she said to Alana. "Whenever you're ready." Alana glanced around the ballroom one last time. She saw realization settling in, fear replacing confidence, silence where laughter had been. This was the cost of mistaking access for authority. Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. "You're ruining us!" Alana's expression remained composed. "No," she said. "I'm ending an arrangement that no longer aligns with my values." She turned away. As she walked toward the exit, conversations died completely. Phones lowered. Eyes followed her, not with mockery now, but with something closer to respect, tinged with regret. Behind her, Margaret Hale stood alone, surrounded by everything she thought she owned. And for the first time that night, she understood the truth. The room had never belonged to her. It had simply been waiting for its real owner to stand up and leave. Alana Brooks had taken only 3 steps toward the exit when the room finally understood. Not fully. Not cleanly. But enough. The first sound wasn't shouting. It was the soft, frantic vibration of phones lighting up all at once, screens glowing like scattered embers in the dimmed ballroom. Notifications stacked. Headlines refreshed. Messages collided with denials. Meridian Axis withdraws from Hale Holdings effective immediately. Someone near the stage whispered it aloud without meaning to. A ripple followed. Then another. Conversations snapped into focus around a single truth that could no longer be avoided. Margaret Hale wasn't just embarrassed. She was exposed. A man who had laughed earlier cleared his throat and stepped back, creating space where there had once been comfort. A woman who had filmed the insult now lowered her phone, suddenly aware of what it had captured and what it might cost her. The crowd had shifted, not emotionally, strategically. Margaret felt it before she saw it. She turned slowly, scanning faces she had known her entire life. Donors, partners, allies. People who had toasted with her, smiled with her, benefited from her name. They wouldn't meet her eyes. One by one, they looked away. Some pretended to check messages. Others leaned toward new conversations, eager to place distance between themselves and whatever was unfolding. A few excused themselves altogether, heels moving too quickly, ties suddenly loosened. Margaret swallowed. "Stop," she said, her voice louder than she intended. "This isn't what it looks like." No one answered. The silence was worse than laughter. Across the room, the man in the charcoal tuxedo had moved closer to a small group near the bar. He spoke in hushed tones, his posture angled away from Margaret now, as if alignment itself had become dangerous. Another guest murmured, "She owns Meridian Axis?" Someone else replied, "Apparently, all of it." The words spread faster than correction ever could. Margaret took a step forward, then another. "Alana," she called, desperation leaking into her voice. Alana stopped, but she didn't turn around. The room leaned in. Margaret walked closer. heels unsteady now, her confidence stripped down to something raw and exposed. "You can't just walk away," she said. "This is still my event." Alana turned then, slowly, calmly, and in that moment, the room saw it clearly. This wasn't defiance, it was finality. "I already have," Alana said. The words were quiet, but they carried. Margaret's face flushed. "You humiliated me," she said. Alana's gaze didn't waver. "You humiliated yourself." A sharp intake of breath moved through the nearest guests. Margaret shook her head, voice breaking. "You think money makes you better?" Alana considered her for a moment. Not with anger, with clarity. "No," she replied. "I think behavior reveals who people already are." That did it. Something in Margaret collapsed. She looked around again, this time not for validation but for rescue. There was none. The guards at the entrance stood straighter now, eyes on Alana, not Margaret. The staff followed suit, instinctively orienting themselves toward the new center of gravity. A woman Margaret had known for years whispered to her husband, "We should go." He nodded immediately. The orchestra conductor lowered his hands fully, setting his baton down as if acknowledging that the evening's performance was over. Alana turned back toward the exit. As she walked, the crowd parted not dramatically, not ceremoniously, but instinctively. Space opened for her without being asked. Phones lowered, whispers trailed behind her. She didn't raise her voice once. That's power. Margaret stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by chandeliers and silence. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't answer. She didn't need to. The message was already written across the room. Alana reached the doors and paused, hand resting lightly against the frame. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Behind her, an empire was recalculating its losses. In front of her, the night waited cool, quiet, untouched by applause. And as the doors closed softly behind her, the truth settled in with irreversible clarity. The room had turned, not toward justice, not toward fairness, but toward power. And for the first time that evening, it had chosen correctly. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unfolded, methodically, publicly, without mercy. By the time Alana Brooks stepped into the cool night air, Hale Holdings board members were already on emergency calls, voices low, tempers high. Screens across the city refreshed with the same headline, phrased politely enough to sound neutral but devastating all the same. Meridian Axis withdraws strategic support. Inside that sentence lived panic. Banks began asking questions they hadn't bothered with weeks earlier. Covenants were reviewed. Exposure was recalculated. What had once been framed as a temporary liquidity issue was suddenly visible for what it was, a fragile structure propped up by a deal that no longer existed. The calls Margaret had ignored kept coming. From her father, from attorneys, from people who had assured her just hours ago that everything was under control. It wasn't. At the gala, guests trickled out faster now, their exits carefully timed, their excuses rehearsed. No one wanted to be the last one seen standing too close to a collapsing name. Even the photographers packed up early, instinctively sensing which images were now worth preserving and which were best forgotten. Margaret remained in the ballroom, alone at the center of a space that suddenly felt far too large. Her father finally reached her. "What happened?" he demanded, voice sharp with disbelief. Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it again. How did she explain that arrogance had a cost, that a moment of public cruelty had triggered a chain of private ruin? "She was there," Margaret said weakly. "The woman from Meridian Axis." Silence. Then, colder. "You spoke to her?" Margaret didn't answer. The line went dead. Across town, partners began distancing themselves with carefully worded statements. Charities quietly removed the Hale name from upcoming materials. Invitations were reconsidered. Introductions postponed. Reputation, Alana knew, didn't collapse, it eroded, and erosion was permanent. She sat in the back of her car as the city lights slid past the window, unhurried. Her phone buzzed once more. Market reaction contained. No escalation. She exhaled slowly. This wasn't victory. It was alignment. She hadn't destroyed anything that wasn't already compromised. She had simply removed the illusion holding it together. Back at the ballroom, Staff began dismantling the event with forced efficiency. Tables cleared, glasses collected, the chandeliers dimmed. Margaret Hale stood motionless, staring at her reflection in a polished surface that no longer reflected admiration, only aftermath. For the first time, she understood what she had lost. Not the deal, not the money, but the unquestioned authority she had always assumed would protect her. And somewhere beyond the reach of that room, Alana Brooks moved forward without looking back, leaving behind a lesson no one there would ever forget. Power doesn't need to announce itself. It only needs to withdraw. Morning came quietly. No sirens. No headlines screaming collapse. Just absence. At Hale Holdings, offices opened to unanswered emails and carefully worded messages that avoided the word withdrawal but could not hide its weight. Meetings were postponed. Calls went unreturned. A deal once described as inevitable now existed only as a cautionary reference. The gala photos never made it to print. Some images disappeared. Others were quietly buried. No one wanted to remember the night they laughed at the wrong person. Margaret Hale didn't leave her apartment that morning. She sat alone at her kitchen counter, phone face down, replaying the moment again and again, the laughter, the pointing, the confidence that had felt so permanent. She had mistaken inheritance for immunity, and she would carry that mistake for the rest of her life. Across the city, Alana Brooks moved through her day without interruption. A morning briefing, a review call, a quiet confirmation that resources previously allocated elsewhere would now be redirected. Not as punishment, as principle. Later that afternoon, Meridian Axis announced the creation of a new initiative, one that funded minority-owned firms denied access to capital due to non-financial bias. The announcement was understated. No press conference, no interviews, just action. Alana read the final draft once, approved it, moved on. She didn't think about Margaret. She didn't need to. The lesson had already landed where it mattered. That evening, Alana stood alone in her office, city lights stretching endlessly below. She reflected not on the deal, not on the insult, but on the quiet precision of consequences. Power, she knew, wasn't about humiliation. It was about choice. The choice to walk away. The choice to correct imbalance. The choice to let systems speak where voices once failed. She picked up her coat and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would come with new rooms, new assumptions, new tests. And when it did, Alana Brooks would enter them the same way she always had, not demanding recognition, not asking permission, simply carrying the kind of power that didn't need to raise its voice to be heard.